So the next speaker is Zhimin Hu, who is a PhD student at the University of Padova in Italy. And also, very interestingly, Zhimin is a polyglot, so he speaks at least 9 different languages. And he investigates for the project that he's conducting for his PhD, investigates line in different languages. So he will tell us about this. Hi, Zhimin, we can see your slides very clearly. Can you speak to
Yeah,
see
sure.
if we can hear? Yeah.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah, can you speak a bit more?
Can you hear me well?
Yeah, I think so. Well enough.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry with my computer. If I speak louder, then you only see my beard and my mouth.
Yeah. So we
Okay.
can hear you well. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I have to apologize. I didn't prepare myself well, so I didn't integrate my personal experience to my talk today. So maybe we can just start with the slides that I've prepared. It's part of the research that I'm doing at the University of Padova with my supervisors. And research that Simone Supizio mentioned earlier. So as you can see, it's a nudge theory of language. So basically, I'm going to share with you some of the experiments that we did at the university here to go deeper into how a foreign language can influence our judgments and decisions. So Simona mentioned earlier that language can be used as a nudge. So what is a nudge? This is a concept made famous by Richard Thaler, who is actually a behavioral economist who studies decision-making in business and economics mostly. So one of the most famous examples that he used in his book was, I'm going to show you a picture that may be disturbing for some of you. Just be prepared. This toilet. I mean, if you're male, then you probably know what I'm talking about. But if you're female or non-binary, that you don't go to a male toilet, then you probably don't understand the situation. So you can see that this is a urinal that people that we as male go pee into. And here you can see a little dot in the urinal that's actually a fly. So what this nudge means is if you put a fly in this toilet, in this urinal, then the male spillage in the toilet was drastically decreased. So, but it doesn't really mean that, by having this fly in the urinal, it fundamentally changes the way you pee. It just makes your behavior a little bit different. So this is what the basic concept of a nudge is. So in a multilingual world, as we have talked about today, that most of us speak or listen to or interact with people in a different language or different languages. So this led to this line of research of how a foreign language or in a foreign language context can make our perceptions of different social scenarios and decision making a little bit differently. The famous one, the original study was by Kaiser 2012, that in 2012 they imagined a world in a pandemic, and that there was a vaccine that you need to use to either save 60% of the population or kill 40% of the population. Basically, the mathematics is the same, it's just the framing that's different. So in the native foreign language, you can kind of see a biased view. So you're more likely, to go into the save frame rather than the kill frame. But in the foreign language, this bias is eliminated. So that kind of, started this whole study on the foreign language effect. So as we mentioned earlier, the main theories proposed by people before is that, in a foreign language, you have reduced emotional reactions, and this has been supported by studies with skin conductance, etc., and heart rate, etc., etc. There are also studies that suggest that, in a foreign language, you have reduced social norms. So, for example, in a study from Polish researchers, they have people translate swear words. So the F words, C C words, or maybe in Polish, the P words into the other language. And they saw that, the people would choose to have, less severe word choices in the second language or the foreign language that they were using. So this led to this psychological distance hypotheses in foreign language use, and because of this distance, it is suggested that we control our thoughts a lot more, and this is based on the famous dual system of decision making by Kahneman and Tversky, in his famous book. You have system 1, which is automatic, fast, and conscious, heuristic, and system 2, which is controlled, slow, and conscious. So supposedly in a foreign language, or more because of the reduced emotions and social norms, that we engage more system 2 in our thinking and judgments. So what's unclear to me and us here with my supervisor is that, a lot of these studies that came to this conclusion used scenarios of, moral dilemmas, or like profanity, profane words. So you have like people eating dogs and you have to judge them, or like incest. So these scenarios all involve a lot of negative emotions. And so we didn't find it convincing to say that foreign language indeed reduces, social norms, and so we wanted to, dive a little bit deeper into this issue. So imagine these two scenarios. So on the left, you're in a relationship with your boyfriend, but your boyfriend is looking at a different woman or a boy, and depending on your taste, and then you're telling a lie. You're saying, no, I'm not doing that. So that would be typically considered unacceptable according to our social norms, right? So a black lie, as we would call it. But on the right, you can see, if you're going out shopping with your friends, your friend tries out an outfit that's just, too dashy and outlandish, but you still would say, oh, you look sweet, you look great. And that's what we call a white lie, or different languages, there are different ways to define what a white lies, or call what white lies are, but you get the idea. So in the first study that I'm going to present is that we hypothesize maybe, okay, if that's the case, indeed foreign language reduces, social norms, then maybe you would find a black lies to be more acceptable and white lies to be less acceptable in a foreign language. So we conducted the study. We asked people to, judge these scenarios in the native and foreign languages. So in our case, the foreign language is Italian. I'm sorry, in English, and the native language is Italian. This is where you see a trial in the foreign language condition. And what we found was that, as you can see, the blue bars represent, the ratings on the Likert scale from 1 to 8 of the acceptability of lie in the foreign language, and the red ones represent the acceptability in the native language. As you can see, the difference in the foreign language is reduced compared to the native language. So if it was just negative emotions that was reduced, then you would observe this effect only in the black lies. But we saw that also in the white lies. So you can see that there's an interaction, a modulating effect of the foreign language in this. So we thought, okay, attitudes and norms and control behavior, these are antecedent predictors of intentions, and then finally behavior or decisions. So in the next experiment, we asked them to show their intention to tell these lies. And as you can see, again, the pattern is very similar. The effect is bidirectional, and the ratings are reduced in the foreign language compared to the native language. And it depends on the lie. So basically, intrinsic negative amount of negative emotions related to that. And in the third experiment, wanted to go a little bit deeper. We only used white lies in this case. So we compared, telling white lies or telling the blunt truth. So instead of telling your friend that, he or she looks great, you tell your friend that you look fat. So basically what you can see is the same pattern. So if you tell a white lie, it's kind of it's judged as less acceptable in a foreign language. But if you tell the blunt truth, it becomes more acceptable in the foreign language. So we believe that this is an indication that a foreign language indeed modulates the access to social norms. So in the final one, and we'll also kind of explore the decision making on this a little bit. So we have the same scenarios, which are standardized and normalized in the Italian context. We ask them to tell, like black lies and white lies. It's a yes and no making decisions. So you just say yes and no. And you kind of see the same pattern again, in the foreign language, you're more likely to say yes to a black lie, but in the white lie scenarios, you're a little bit less likely. And so we did a meta-analysis of these 4 experiments together, and we observed, a very consistent and very small effect. I mean, the effect is small, so I mean, it doesn't mean that like you see lies completely differently. You may just see them a little bit, slightly differently, and this is what we call a nudge. So you kind of nudge your judgments or perceptions of social behaviors, and we reason that this is due to the reduction of social norms in a foreign language. And however, in the last experiment, we used the dichotomous decision making, so it's yes and no. And this is quite relevant to all of us because, I mean, in our daily lives, with the computers and technology, we're constantly, having to make, simple yes and no decisions and accept or reject, for example, online cookies, not the cookies that we can eat, unfortunately. Maybe in 100 years, we'll have digital cookies that we can eat. So this is actually a response bias. And this response bias, depending on, whether we're more likely to click one answer to the other, can be problematic. So just think about your own cases when you visit a website, in a foreign country where you have to accept and reject. Do you always select accept or rather than reject? And this is called acquiescence. So acquiescence is called sort of like the act of accepting or agreeing to something, often unwillingly, or in simple layman's terms, you can just say that, it's a yes-saying tendency. And the theoretical framework behind this is, for example, we have when we presented with a decision or information, we have to first represent it mentally. That's the representation stage, and then we have to assess that information and then make our decision. The classical way that we think how we make decision is the Cartesian procedure. So we think we first comprehend, and then we accept or reject. But what a more precise description of the decision-making process is the Spinozan procedure. So we first comprehend and accept, and then we either certify that acceptance or we unaccept it. So comprehension and acceptance are simultaneous. So So what this means is that comprehension entails automatic acceptance, and unacceptance requires additional cognitive resources. And so the first phase is easy, but the second phase requires more processing. We thought, and the experimental paradigm to study this acquiescence effect is using personality traits. So for example, you have a scale, maybe most of you have taken this personality test to see whether you're more, introverted person, extroverted person. So you have this adjectives or personality traits. You have to select whether it describes you or it doesn't describe you. So whether introverted, extroverted. So if you selected introverted, then you wouldn't select extroverted, right? So you have 100 of these words. If you select 150 of them, then you would rationally reject the other 50. So these researchers, they have people put participants under high cognitive load conditions. So you have to, make these decisions while listening to different kinds of musical instruments, and you have to guess which musical instrument it is. So here you can see, you know, I'm not going to name the names of these four because I don't even know what the first one or the second one is called. So what they observed is that, you know, you're more likely to say it's like me or acquiesce to your decisions when you're under high cognitive load condition. And the time to reject that adjective or personality trait that's self-descriptory is much longer compared to, you know, just accepting that personality trait. So we thought, okay, since processing a foreign language requires more cognitive resources, of course, this depends on your experience and the level of you know, fluency, proficiency in the bilingualism in your life. So we expected people to show more acquiescent patterns in a foreign language. So we did the same test in Italian as a native language and English as a foreign language, and we used the standardized set of this personality test in Italian. So this is validated. So 50 of them load to one spectrum, and then 50 of the words load to the other spectrum. And we had people to make this decision. And here we can see in the foreign language, they're slightly more likely to say yes, but I mean, or acquiesce to certify that personality traits. But I mean, this is not significant. But for reaction time, you do see some interesting results. So in the foreign language, or in general, it take longer to reject that personality trait. But this time is much, much longer in a foreign language than the native language, which means, you know, a foreign language indeed affects the second stage, which is the assessment stage of that decisional output in the end, whether to reject or certify. So in the first experiment, we manipulated compared between foreign language and native language. But, you know, in foreign language, there are just so many words that we don't know. I mean, it's hard to say, you know, whether people knew these personality traits or not, and whether they exhibit the same kind of patterns for the words that they already know or the words that they don't know. So in the second experiment, we made that distinction. So we included, you know, foreign word knownness into the experimental paradigm. And this is what we see. Indeed, so if you know the foreign word or the personality traits, you're more likely to say yes to that trait, to certify your answer compared to the native language. And for the unknown words, obviously, I mean, it's logical, you're more likely to reject that if you don't know something. And this has actually been showcased in studies in social psychology, that you're more hesitant and more likely to reject unknown information. And interestingly, it's the same pattern for the results. So you can see in the foreign known condition. So if you know the foreign word, it takes much longer for you to reject that compared to in the native language. But, you know, if you don't know the word, you just have to make a decision. I mean, there's actually not much of a difference whether you have to certify or reject. You're just making a motorial action if you don't know something. But if you do know something, then foreign language may make you take longer to reject things. So this is important because, I mean, we don't want to, you know, be, you know, inconsistent with our decisions, right? I mean, just it's not something, the personality that we want to strive to have. So we talked about reaction time. So we know that time is a very important domain in the decision-making process. I mean, we just don't make decisions as soon as possible. We actually need time to think about decisions. And in decision-making literature, is sort of like this accumulation of evidence. And then finally, if you have enough evidence, then you go through that threshold and you output that response. But there are just so many things in that time frame, you know, when we receive the stimuli of a decision making scenario, and then the output of the decision. There's so many things to think about. I mean, it's impossible to measure all of them. We can only use, third party or proxy strategies to understand what exactly is going on there. So there are many ways to measure, you know, sort of the temporal dynamics and domains of decision making. You can have, you know, EEG, or measuring the brain waves. You can measure eye movements, eye tracking. So, you know, no methodology is perfect. So in our study, we decided to use mouse tracking because it's first of all easily available to us, and it has a median distortion risk, which means it kind of can faithfully track sort of like the decision, how decisions unfold over time in your mouth trajectories. So for example, if you analyze mouth trajectories, you can kind of like, for example, in this, a lot of this been studied in personality and social psychology. So you kind of have to like decide whether, it's more likely to be a white person or black person, and you're more likely to hire a white person or black person. So the measures that we use in this technology is the deviation from trajectory. So if you see a straight line from the bottom half of the screen, the face, and to the decision white, you have a direct trajectory. So the more deviated you are, then the more conflict you face in your decision. You're more distracted by, the alternative choice. And also, so this is one. So the maximum deviation, and there's a time point associated with that. So at what time do you begin to deviate the most? The beginning, the mid, or the late phase of the decision-making process? And also the entire area, of the curved line and the straight line can kind of indicate how the level of conflict that you have in that decision. And another measurement that we looked at is the X flips, or the type of turns that you can have in the trajectory. So the more twists and turns you have in a trajectory, the more uncertainty or the more change of mind that can happen when you make your decision. So this is to have an idea. So we have this classical moral dilemmas that's been that have been used to study the foreign language effect, right? You have the switch dilemma, so you have to switch the trolley, is coming to kill one person to save five, or you have the footbridge dilemma, which says you have to push a person to stop the trolley in order to save five people. So the difference between these two dilemmas is that in the switch dilemma, in our case, we call that incidental. So the death. What that means is that the death of that one person is an accident, or is an incident, is the consequence of having to save the five people. Whereas in the footbridge dilemma, we call that instrumental, which means you actually use that other one person as an instrument to save the other people. So you're actually intentionally doing that. And in moral psychology, there has been a lot of talk on whether intention and personal involvement has a lot to do with how you make decisions, and your utilitarian or deontological decisions may be dependent on that type of dilemma. So the general idea of the foreign language effect is that you're more likely to induce utilitarian decisions. So utilitarian means killing that person, rather than I won't do that. I'm not going to kill that person, versus deontological in a foreign language. So we did that using a standardized set of moral dilemmas, actually 60 of them, and the experiment actually lasted quite long, for about an hour, and they had to also answer a questionnaire of their bilingual experience, ranging from age of acquisition to how they learn their language, et cetera, et cetera. So we're still analyzing the data and trying to interpret the results. So I'm just going to show you some of the preliminary and I think interesting findings that we have so far. So as you can see, the blue lines represent the trajectory of the native language, which is Italian, while the red line represent the trajectories of the foreign language. You can see that in both these dilemmas, in the foreign language, you're more deviated from the perfect trajectory. So there's more conflict when you're making a sacrificial moral decision in the foreign language. But the time point of that deviation may be a little bit different. So in the incidental dilemma, you kind of can see a sort of more constant deviation. But in the instrumental dilemma, there's kind of like a change in that deviation. At the beginning, you're not so deviated, but you're likely to deviate more towards the end of your decision. And this is in fact kind of consistent with the literature more psychology, where they found, for sort of like the incidental dilemmas, you kind of show a constant spread of your conflict over time, but in the instrumental, you're sort of like more towards the end. And what's more interesting is we just compared, the deontological, which is saying no, not to kill people, or the utilitarian choices to kill people. Again, the blue lines represent the native language, which is Italian. The red lines represent foreign language. As you can see, people are more deviated. There's more conflict in the native language for deontologicals saying no. I mean, we understand that already. What's more interesting in the utilitarian choices is that you have to decide to kill people. In the foreign language, you're much more likely to make decisional changes over time. So you're always deciding between kill, not kill, you're back and forth. So this is an indication that indeed a foreign language kind of affects our way to think and make decisions. But I mean, the exact mechanism, we're still trying to find a proper way to interpret this. But I mean, this is evidence, that we do not think entirely in the same way in a foreign language compared to in our native language. So to summarize, a foreign language does not fundamentally change how we see things. We don't think that, this is in support of the Sapir-Whorf theory. We just think that, it make people see things a little bit differently. And this can serve as a nudge in a lot of social scenarios. And of course, this is dependent on personal experience and foreign language. In our studies, we mainly used a homogeneous pool of, students from the university or people from prolific. So we are sure that, they actually knew the foreign language and they're proficient in them. So, but we can imagine, the effects to be even larger for people who are not proficient in that language. So that's all of my presentation today, and thank you very much for your attention. And I would also like to acknowledge the involvement of my supervisors. Thank you.